You sit at a desk. They sit at a desk. You have sales reports. They have book reports. You need supplies. They need supplies. Business is a lot like school. That's why your small business should take advantage of back-to-school deals at Staples. Now, Staples 1-inch 3-ring binders are $1.92. 1-subject notebooks are just 25 cents, and 2-pocket poly folders are just 35 cents each. Make back-to-school your business at Staples.
In-store only while supplies last. Offer ends 9/1/18, limit 30.
Welcome to Ascension Sisters, a live radio podcast for people who want to know the truth about how the world really works. From whistleblowers and witnesses to deep research and official documents, we read between the lines of society's conventional narrative to give you the information you need to design your life the way you want, based on intelligence, facts, intuition, and hard-won wisdom, not propaganda, disinformation, or somebody else's agenda. Welcome to Ascension Sisters. Welcome to Ascension Sisters. I'm your host, Cece Kelly, and I'm here with whistleblower and my real-life sister, Susanne Helene. Susanne, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Cece.
In the first episode of the series a couple of weeks ago we called The Nuclear Truth, Susanne gave her testimony about her experiences as an employee at a large medical facility in Southern California that was built on the former location of a NASA Boeing industrial space complex and home to both the Apollo and Space Shuttle missions. In addition, this land was formerly home to the first nuclear reactor in California, as well as a neutron bomb factory back in the 20s and 30s. So just think about that for a second. Think about all the toxic, hazardous, and radioactive materials that must have existed back then and may well still exist and may potentially be the cause of cancer and the deaths of some of Susanne's former colleagues. We reported a couple of weeks ago that about 20% of Susanne's colleagues have succumbed to cancer and other treatment-resistant diseases, including Susanne being diagnosed with cancer herself, and that on her first day of work at the medical complex built on the former NASA site, the human resources lady said that when she was giving the office tour, she said, "Don't drink from the water fountain. The water is radioactive." And she wasn't joking. We actually have some startling late-breaking news to share tonight. This is a live radio program, so we can be timely like that. Susanne has more information on the fate of some of her colleagues.
I recently learned of the untimely death due to cancer of one of the former employees that I worked with who worked in the ambulance dispatch department. It was in another office, but on the same floor where I had worked. And the news came from a coworker in the same area where I was, and who happened to know this employee really well. And this person had shared that there were, in fact, 13 cancer deaths that many people I was completely unaware of, since I had also worked in another position during my time, during the 9 years.
And she's filing a report. Is that part of the update?
That's right. Yes, because of the number of people who had died from the cancer deaths, she's filing a report with OSHA. And she is completely unaware of this broadcast.
And is it because of the number of cancers and deaths, but also the co-location?
Oh, yes. And there's such a small proximity. That's why.
Well, that's really interesting news, Susanne. Thank you very much. And we will keep you, the listeners, up to date on the outcome of the report as more information unfolds. As far as tonight's episode goes, let's get right into tonight's topic. We're going to explore more of the overarching narrative around these untimely deaths and whether or not toxic substances and radioactivity are to blame. Last week, we took a deep dive into the history of the transfer of the land in Downey from NASA and Boeing to the city of Downey, and subsequently to a private developer who, in all likelihood, based on our research, did not properly remediate or test the soil, water, and air for unsafe levels of radioactivity. So tonight we're going to explore the rather unusual nature of Susanne's former job that she performed on these locations in question that we're talking about in Southern California, to give you, the listeners, some contextual reference and to perhaps more fully understand the complexity of the situation and how she and her colleagues may have developed cancer and other diseases as a result of ongoing exposure to radioactivity. So we're going to talk about what Susan was actually doing in her position that exposed her to these substances. So, Susanne, why don't we get started with a description of what the PET team is, this team that you worked on, and what was your role exactly? It all sounds kind of mysterious.
Okay. So PET stands for Psychiatric Emergency Team. And I was a psychiatric emergency clinician on the team, and I was the responder to calls for emergency evaluations for people in the ERs who showed up because they were a danger to themselves, a danger to others, or what we call gravely disabled because they were unable to take care of themselves safely due to some form of a very bizarre psychiatric breakdown or instability. And I worked during the night and what we call the knock shift, because knock for nocturnal. And and so we would work when the psychiatrists, when their shift ended, usually like during business hours, and we did all the overnight evaluations.
Interesting. So how did that work exactly? You're working at night. So can you maybe describe a typical night at work? What happens?
Okay.
How do you get called into work?
Mm-hmm.
How and you're driving around. How does it all work?
Okay. Well, the in the emergency rooms, when the doctor goes in to find out what's going on with the patient, and they determine that this is someone who may need to go to a psychiatric hospital, but they of course need a professional consult. They would call our dispatch, our base. Basically, that's where, it's one of the sites that I had worked at for years. The dispatcher would then page me, and I would go out to wherever that was in LA County.
Okay, and so you're driving around in the middle of the night,
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to these emergency rooms, and do you know what you're going to encounter when you arrive at the emergency rooms? Do you have any clue about who you're going to meet and what you're going to assess?
Well, I do get a summary from when the dispatcher who does an analysis of the case and tells me about, what's going on with that person, why the doctor thinks they need to be evaluated maybe for an involuntary hospitalization. So I do have some general idea what the symptoms and what the issues are.
Okay. So I know that you can meet some cases are probably, like what are the typical cases, not the extraordinary cases, but what are the typical types of cases that you deal with?
Okay. I think that the typical cases have to do with severe depression, where someone is having suicidal thoughts. It's very common. The other cases where someone has some aggression or agitation, and they may have had a welfare check from the police, and they're brought in for an assessment for concerns about threats or danger to others. And then the other, which actually is fairly unfortunately common, is people who've had a prior history and they stop taking the medications their psychiatrist prescribed, and then they develop symptoms of their illness again, which might be like, hearing voices or having what we would, a lot of people are familiar with what paranoia is and thinking someone's out to get them. And it's, caused them to like barricade themselves in the house. I mean, there's things like that that, actually is more common than you would think.
Wow, that's amazing. So maybe you could go on. I think it would be very interesting because this is a highly unusual job. I'm sure most people have never even heard of it before. Basically, clinical psychologists who are driving around in the middle of the night, not unlike, Scully from the X-Files meets Dr. House, going to emergency rooms all across Southern California, diagnosing and assessing potential patients. And you're going to meet a wide range of, a variety of a different cast of characters, so to speak. Maybe you can tell us about some of the cases that stick out in your mind from the many years that you performed this service.
Mm-hmm. Oh, gosh. It's actually interesting you mentioned Scully from the X-Files and Dr. House, because I would go out, and sometimes it was very, and I'll share some cases that really stand out for me. But a lot of my work is to really determine, what's going on here. Is it what I, explained by a psychiatric disorder, or are there other factors, including substances, toxic exposure? I mean, a number of things. So like Dr. House would always kind of do what they call the differential diagnosis. What else might explain what's going on here? You have to really look at it with a critical eye from a clinical standpoint. And then sometimes there's what's called not otherwise specified, meaning something doesn't meet all the symptom criteria of what we would see in the diagnostic statistical manual. So I'll share with you some interesting encounters. The first one that I have to say I'll never forget, I'd gone to the hospital emergency room, and right when I walked in, where I approached the nurse's station, the nurse sitting, she was behind the desk and counter, and said, "I hope you're not going to go in there alone." And I was a little kind of confused, thinking, well, there are patients, sometimes they're violent, and they do have security there, and they are in the restraints. So if they are, if there's any risk of anybody getting hurt. So I couldn't imagine why she would say that. So I went on, and then walking toward the room, and I saw three, they were kind of dressed in plain clothes, but they were holding Bibles. 3 men circling and reading out loud Bible, scripture. And I thought, what on earth is going on? I had gotten a report from the dispatcher, but I didn't expect this. I had no idea. So I walk in, and there's a man who comes out, and he has a Bible. And his T-shirt, he's wearing a T-shirt, and it's like wet. And he said, well, when you go in to talk to him, stand at a distance because he spits. And it was really gross. Who
spits? The patient.
The patient was spitting. Apparently had spat like quite a distance, and it was a pastor. His shirt was covered with spit. And so I could see what it was almost looking like an exorcism in there. They were reading the Bible passages out loud. And what the pastor told me was that he believed it was a case of a demonic possession. And I said, well, okay, please pray for me. And then I said it a little jokingly, but they did. They circled around me and said a prayer. That
the pastors, the three pastors,
and they, prayed for me to be safe and protected, and and obviously for the patient, for his wellness. So I went in and called out the patient's name and tried to engage him, and there was silence. And then I just kept repeating his name, and he just a voice. It was from just like real deep inside, and he said, "He's not here." And it was kind of strange because this is, somebody who was, I would say, in more what we would call catatonic, in a very rigid, like frozen posture with arms raised and kind of legs like kind of spread like a frog, and just in that suspended state, and wasn't speaking. So I thought maybe this is a case of someone having like a catatonic reaction or some related to a psychosis, right? And then when he said he's not here and spoke, I thought, okay, maybe we're going to get somewhere here. And I said, well, okay, well, where is he? And then the hand that had a heart monitor where there's a little light, there was a light blinking on the finger that it was taped to, points to the center of his chest, like as in here. And I said, all right, well then who are you? And he said, we are many. And then, which was very chilling, we know who you are. We know your background. We know why you're here, and that you are going to put him away forever. We guarantee it. And that was...
The voice said that to you.
The voice said that to me, or the person, and I called the voice because, he said, we are many. And I was really taken aback, and there was a very chilling feeling that came over me. So I then was thinking, all right, what is going on here? So I tried to get a little more information, and okay, I'm going to say this. This is my personal background. I'm a born-again Christian, and in my religion, that it says in Scripture, that you can call upon the authority of Jesus Christ to cast out demons and unclean spirits. And so I thought, all right, why don't I give this a whirl? I just said, by the authority of Jesus Christ, I call upon you to come out of him. And then he said, you're nothing, with a sneer, like lips curling. We're not answering any more of your questions. Complete silence, and there was nothing after that. So then I left the room, and and I was just calling some family to get a kind of a backstory on what happened. And the pastor came up with the spit all over the T-shirt, came up, and he said, I think this is a case of demonic possession. We had one like this before, and it took 3 days for it to come out.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. That was something. I ended up, of course, having to arrange a hospitalization for him. And I was able to look into the electronic chart to see how things went. And there was a medication given to him, which apparently he reacted to by twisting and contorting his body, which is not an unusual reaction to that type of medication. But in this case, he came out of the catatonic state and had no recollection of what happened.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So that is a highly unusual case. And there was something about this that had something to do with another case that you worked on after that?
And this is interesting. 2 weeks after this, I remember I'm called to, the ER for a woman who claims that there were zombies who came up out of the ground in her backyard, that there were 5 of them over 2 weeks that were harassing her to do things for them, like talk to certain people, find certain things, go certain places for them, as if they had like unfinished business. And like we hear about ghosts or something that have unfinished business. Right.
They were trying to get this woman to do things for them.
Right. Exactly. And she refused. But she did describe them like ghosts that are kind of transparent. She said they were like flesh and blood, and used the word zombies. And what was especially interesting was that her spouse was there, and although he didn't see them, he corroborated what she was saying, that it was consistent, that it was the same ones every day, and that there was one that was threatening to harm their pet if she didn't do what they told her to do. And so she gotten to the point she couldn't work anymore. And these were professionals; they weren't people with this. She hadn't had any prior history, because I always look into that. From mental health to trauma to drugs and alcohol, to anything to explain why this might be happening. And there wasn't anything that really added up. So apparently she had was unable. They wouldn't let her sleep. So she,
like the zombies.
They meaning the zombies.
Like how did they not let her sleep?
She said that they kept her up all night, pestering her and asking her to do things, and so she wasn't sleeping. And she just got where she felt like she just couldn't take it anymore, wasn't able to do her job. She actually worked in a healthcare position. And so she ended up in the hospital, not sure what could be done for her.
Wow. And how did she get in the hospital? I mean, how did this come to light? Like, did someone call the hospital? Did they bring her in? Like,
oh, yeah.
What happened?
Her spouse brought her because it was just where, the sleep deprivation, not being able to work, needing a note for work. So you usually, you're going to go to the urgent care, to the emergency room. They sent her to the emergency room because of what she said, that she was seeing people who weren't there. And that was more of a psychiatric emergency than, like, you can't go to the urgent care for things like this. You have to go to the ER.
And did you get the sense that she was aware of how strange it was?
Yeah, I did. So she, that's why she waited 2 weeks. She thought it would just go away. And it's just a very strange story. She didn't want people to think she was crazy. And I was talking to her because of her, her background, and about maybe, going to see a therapist, maybe talking about, maybe something related to traumatic stress, and she didn't want to do that. And I talked about, maybe, talking to the doctor about a medication that might help with, some of the, the thoughts. And she said, no, not unless I can take it at home. And because I had recommended she actually maybe take it in the hospital, thinking maybe time away where she could sleep and make sure she didn't have side effects. But she would not do that because she said, well, how will I know if it works? And I was saying, well, what do you mean? Well, I don't see the zombies here, meaning the ER. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I'm going to see them in the hospital.
Oh, my God.
So unless I take the pill and I'm at home, that's the only way I'm going to know if it works. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So that was very interesting.
It's bizarrely logical for somebody who's seeing zombies in the backyard and they're telling her to do things.
Yes, and threatening to harm her dog if she doesn't do what they tell her to do. So I actually, unfortunately, didn't get to find out what happened after that, whether or not the medication helped or whether she even took it or if they moved. Who knows?
That's amazing. And you'd think that these were highly unusual, but actually these kinds of cases were not 100% the norm, but they were more frequent than you'd think.
Yes. And I certainly wouldn't have time for this show to go into a lot of this, but I have to tell you, there was quite a cluster among kids, actually early, like tweens to early adolescents. And one that really does stand out, I'll talk about this. This was a girl who was at school, and said she saw a man. She was sitting, I guess, by the window in her class, saw a man dressed in a suit standing outside who told her not to get on the bus, that something was going to happen. And she started to cry and went to the school nurse's office and shared this. They called her mom and said that you need to take her in for a mental health evaluation. So this is, what they told me. I went to the emergency room and responded to that.
So why did they have to take her? She was sitting in school and she saw something out the window.
Yeah.
What did she say she saw out the window?
She said she saw a man dressed in a suit and tie who told her that not to get on the school bus, that there was going to be an accident. And she then started to cry and went to the nurse's office and shared this. And no one else saw anybody outside the window, and they assumed that something was mentally wrong. So they called her mother and said this, take her for a psychiatric evaluation.
And then that's where you met her in the ER.
Exactly. Yes. And when I noticed that, her mother looked really visibly frightened, and this is kind of how things panned out. So apparently this child had no prior history of any type of mental health issue. And the mother said that she was driving and saw her child in the back seat interacting with something that she didn't see anybody else, as if she was talking to someone.
She was like looking in the rearview mirror, and she saw the little girl in the back seat.
Yes, as if someone was next to her, kind of responding if someone was present, and also talking as if there was some type of a two-way conversation, but the mother could only hear what her daughter was saying. And so the mother appeared really frightened, and she told me that and is asking me, "What is this? What is this?"
And how do you have to fill out reports as part of your job? So, how do you report on this exactly?
The
diagnosis, the recommendation, and do other doctors read this and do they think it's, crazy town? What's going on with that?
Well, I have to say is that all I report on is what is stated. Okay, not my own personal impressions. I do want to share something else about this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I was asking the girl if she happened to see this man in the suit and tie here in the emergency room, and she said yes, she did. And I happened to be sitting with my back to the door, and it was a glass door. You could see into the hallway, and I had just a strange sensation in the back of my head. And when I had asked her if she saw him, and she said she did, she was looking outside the door. And I said, where do you see him? And she goes, he's right there, as if pointing behind me. And that was very disturbing to me, because here you have the mother who had seen her child interacting, and then I had this experience.
Wow.
And let me tell you, I did not put that in my report. And so I have to really keep things in more of a clinical discourse, so that these things are going to be going into a person's permanent medical record. So, and also it's something that needs to be dealt with from the standpoint of a diagnosis and a treatment plan that corresponds.
Mm-hmm.
And so that part is sometimes a challenge. How is it that you're going to address these types of problems? So, and I do talk about that in the room too, about whether that person is needing therapy or if they need to be in the hospital, if they're a risk. And so that's part of the work too.
Wow. So in the last minute that we have, we just want to wrap things up here. This, half hour went really quickly, and there's a lot more to talk about. But to sum it up, really, this is a high stress, high stakes job that you're performing for this medical facility, and you're performing it on the locations that we've been talking about that may be infected and contaminated with the radioactivity. And next week, we're going to continue this conversation. In addition to the medical facility, in fact, right across the street from it is a major motion picture studio where those employees also have suffered many of the maladies that Suzanne's colleagues have. And it's something called the downy flu, and that's how these illnesses are characterized. And we're going to be talking more about that, the different movies that were produced on the location where other cancer outbreaks have been recorded, producing movies like Iron Man, Terminator 3, Van Helsing, Indiana Jones, and G.I. Joe, where those employees producing those films became sick and disabled, and we'll be able to comment on that next week. So tune in to Ascension Sisters, and thank you for listening. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Hi, it's Jamie, Progressive's Employee of the Month, 2 months in a row. Leave a message at the... Hi, Jamie. It's me, Jamie. I just had a new idea for our song about the Name Your Price tool. So when it's like, tell us what you want to pay, hey, 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 and the trombone goes, blah, 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 and you say, we'll help you find coverage options to fit your budget. Then we just all do finger snaps while a choir goes, savings coming at ya, savings coming at ya. Yes? No? Maybe? Anyway, see your practice tonight. I got new lyrics for the rap break.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
The Starlight Lounge presents an evening with the Progressive Box.
Oh, what a great audience. Let's dim the lights for this next one. Nope, too much. There it is. Gotta get things just right. Like Progressive's Name Your Price tool. Tell us what you want to pay, and we help you find coverage options that fit your budget. And now, the mood is right. Wait, the lights are back on again. Trudy, can you? And now it's completely dark.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.